Before you settle in for the night, let me tell you something. Have you ever moved into a new place, thinking it's going to be the perfect escape, only to have something you can't explain start to creep up on you? I've been there, and trust me, it's a feeling I wish I could shake off. But I can't. Not anymore. I moved into this old house on the edge of town, a place no one seemed to want, and that's exactly why it was perfect for me. It was quiet, secluded, away from the noise of the city, away from everything I was running from. The house itself wasn't anything special. Creaky floors, dusty corners, and a sense of age that made it feel like it had been there forever. It had character, I guess you could say. When I first walked through the door, it felt like a fresh start. There were no immediate signs of anything unusual, just the usual musty smell of an old house, the kind you get when things haven't been touched for years. It felt like a place I could breathe again. I spent the first few days unpacking, getting used to the rhythm of the place. The creaks in the floorboards, the groaning of the house when the wind picked up, all of it was normal, the kind of thing you'd expect from an old house. But on the third night, that normality shattered. It started with a soft whisper, just a murmur, barely audible, like a breath of wind slipping through the cracks. At first, I thought it was nothing, a draft maybe, the old house settling. But then it happened again, and again. By the fourth night, I was certain I wasn't imagining it. The whispers came from the walls. It wasn't a faint sound anymore. No, this time it was clear, like someone was standing just behind me, speaking directly into my ear. I stayed frozen in bed, staring at the shadows in the room, my heart racing. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just tired, that maybe the pipes or the wind were playing tricks on me. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, more insistent. And then it hit me. It wasn't just random noise, the whispers, they were calling my name. I tried to ignore it, to pretend it was nothing, but deep down I knew it was something far worse. The walls weren't just whispering, they were trying to tell me something. Something I wasn't ready to hear. By the time the first week had passed, I was barely sleeping. Every night, the same soft murmur would seep through the walls, like fingers brushing the edge of my mind. It was as though the house was trying to speak to me, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the voices only grew louder, clearer, more insistent. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. There was something desperate about it, something urgent. My name again and again, in the dark. Sometimes it sounded like it was coming from the walls to my left, other times from the floorboards beneath me. Once, I even thought I heard it from behind the closed door of the attic. I told myself it was just the house settling, that it was all in my head. But when I woke up one morning to find the furniture in my living room shifted slightly, nothing major, just a few inches, enough to make me uneasy, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in the house while I was sleeping. I checked all the windows, the doors. Everything was locked. Nothing unusual. But the more I looked, the more it felt like the house was alive. It was breathing. It was watching. And whatever was in those walls wasn't going to stop until it had my full attention. So I decided to investigate. I couldn't just sit there and wait for the whispers to drive me mad. I spent the afternoon pacing through every room of the house, checking for any signs of something, anything, that could explain the strange noises. The air in the hallway near the attic felt thick, almost suffocating, as though it had been sealed off from the rest of the house for years. I pulled down the attic door, dust swirling in the air as I climbed the stairs. Nothing up there but old furniture covered in sheets, boxes of forgotten things, and a thick layer of dust that seemed to have been undisturbed for decades. But as I walked around, I found something. It wasn't much, just a small, faded photograph tucked into the corner of an old box. The kind of thing that doesn't seem important at first glance, but the photo, of a man standing in front of the house, smiling, caught my attention. There was something wrong about the smile, something off about his eyes. They weren't looking at the camera. They were looking directly at me. I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I turned to leave, I heard it again, that soft whisper. This time, it was louder, clearer. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, heart pounding, but the attic was empty. The walls were still. I didn't know if it was my mind playing tricks on me, or if the house itself was trying to warn me, but something in that moment told me. This place was hiding something. And if I didn't find out what, I wasn't going to make it out. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had become a maze, and I was slowly losing my way inside it. The whispers were relentless now, louder, more urgent. It felt like they were following me, moving from room to room, seeping through every crack in the walls. I couldn't escape them. I had to know what was going on, so I started asking around. There was an old woman who lived a few houses down, someone who'd been around longer than the town itself. People said she knew everything about the place, about the history of the neighborhood. I figured if anyone could help me, it would be her. She wasn't easy to talk to. When I approached her, she looked me up and down as if sizing me up. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "You're staying in that house, aren't you?" she asked, her voice raspy, like she'd been talking to herself for too long. I nodded. She hesitated for a moment before muttering, "It's been empty for years for a reason. No one stays there for long." I asked her why, and she finally told me, though it didn't make much sense at the time. Long ago, there was a family that lived there. The house wasn't always so quiet. It was full of life, full of people. But then, one by one, they disappeared. Never found. No one knows where they went, but people say the house ate them. They say it was the walls that did it, kept their voices, their souls, trapped inside. I thought it was just an old woman's ramblings at first, but something in her voice made me pause. Something in the way she said it, as if she wasn't just telling me a story, but warning me. I went home and didn't sleep at all that night. The whispers were louder than ever, almost like they were inside my head now. They weren't just calling my name anymore. They were begging me to listen. That's when I started to notice something else. The marks on the walls. They were faint at first, like scratches that had been there for years, but the longer I stayed in the house, the clearer they became. They were all over the walls, in the corners, behind the furniture. Symbols I couldn't understand, and in some places, I found something more. Words, scrawled hastily, almost as though someone had tried to escape, tried to leave a message. "Get out. Don't listen to them." The whispers grew louder still. I could hear them in my sleep, calling to me, reaching for me. I felt like I was suffocating, but I couldn't leave. Something had kept me there. Something I couldn't explain. The walls were holding me, and I couldn't tell if it was the house or something else entirely. The next morning, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went back to the attic, desperate for answers. I knew there had to be something hidden in those walls. I had to know what was causing this, what was trapping me here. I found the hidden door. It wasn't a door in the traditional sense. It was a seam in the wall, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I pried it open with my hands, feeling the wood crack beneath my fingers. Behind it, there was a small space, barely enough room for me to crawl through. I hesitated. Every instinct in me told me to turn back. But I pushed forward, forcing my way into the narrow space. And that's when I found it. A room, small, cramped, and covered in dust and cobwebs. But it wasn't empty. There were bones. I froze in the small, dark room, my breath caught in my throat, my heart pounding in my ears. There, amidst the dust and webs, were the bones, human bones, scattered in a grotesque, almost ritualistic pattern. They weren't just tossed carelessly, they were arranged, almost methodically, as though they were placed with a purpose. I stumbled back, my hand hitting the wall behind me. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. This can't be real. This is a nightmare. It has to be. But the smell, the staleness in the air, told me otherwise. It was real. And there was something else. A strange, dark stain on the floor, as though something had been dragged across it, or perhaps something had tried to escape. The closer I looked, the more I realized these weren't just old remains. No, these were recent. These were people who had died here. And yet, there was no record of them. No missing persons reports. I stood there for what felt like hours, my hands trembling, barely able to look away from the remains. And then, just as I was about to leave, I heard it again. The whisper. This time, it was different. It wasn't soft or far away. It was right next to me, in my ear, so close I could feel the cold breath on my skin. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, but the room was empty. My pulse raced as panic gripped me. How could I be alone? I was just in the house, in the attic, the entire time. There was no one here. But then I saw it, written in the dust on the floor, barely visible but unmistakable. "Don't leave. They're waiting." I stumbled back, my hand grabbing at the wall for support, my mind racing. They? Who was waiting? And for what? I didn't know how much more I could take. The walls, the house. It wasn't just haunted, it was alive. Something was feeding off of my fear, off of my confusion. I needed to get out, but the whispers were growing louder now. They filled the space, drowning out my thoughts. I turned to leave the hidden room, but before I could even move, I felt something shift in the air, a heavy pressure, like the house itself was holding me in place. My legs locked, my feet dragging, unwilling to move. I fought it, trying to pull myself toward the door. That's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, a figure. It was the man from the photograph, the one who had been standing in front of the house, smiling that eerie, unnatural smile. Only this time, he wasn't smiling. His face was twisted in a snarl, his eyes wide with a mix of rage and hunger. He reached out, his fingers twitching as if he wanted to grab me, pull me into the darkness. I screamed and backed away, but my body refused to listen. I was trapped, caught between the walls and this thing. My vision blurred, and all I could hear were the whispers, now indistinguishable from the pounding of my own heart. The figure took a step forward. I turned, finally able to move, and bolted for the door. But as I reached it, I felt something cold grab my arm. I twisted in pain, and when I turned back, the figure was gone. The door slammed shut with a deafening crash. I was locked inside. I was trapped. My heart hammered in my chest as I pounded on the door, shouting, clawing at the old wood. But it didn't budge. The house was holding me in place, its walls pressing in from every side. The air had grown thick, heavy, suffocating. I looked around, searching for any way out, but the room I was in had no windows. The only exit was the door that had slammed shut behind me. The whispers were all around me now, swirling in the air, growing louder, clearer. The voice wasn't just calling my name anymore. It was demanding something. "You're not leaving." I pressed my back against the wall, my hands trembling. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. The photograph, the bones, the man, the whispers. All of it was connected. The house, the people who had lived here, the ones who disappeared. It was like the place was feeding off their souls, trapping them. And now, it was doing the same to me. I had to get out. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. I could see my breath thick and misty in the air. The walls seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, vibrating as if the house itself was alive. I turned toward the center of the room where something new had appeared. A shadow. It stretched across the floor, growing larger, darker, as though it was coming to life. I watched, frozen in place, as the shadow slowly took shape until it became a figure. It was the man from the attic. But now, he wasn't just standing there. He was moving toward me. His steps were slow, deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. His eyes locked onto mine, his mouth twisted into that same unnerving smile. And this time, there was no mistaking it. His smile was one of pure malice. "You should have left when you had the chance." His voice was a guttural whisper, but it wasn't just coming from his mouth. It was coming from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. The house itself was speaking. I staggered back, panic seizing me. I could feel the floor under my feet shifting, groaning as though it was alive, as though it was slowly consuming the space I occupied. My chest tightened with the feeling that something was closing in around me, something dark, something ancient. The figure reached out and I stumbled backward, falling to the floor. But as I hit the ground, I noticed something. The floor where I had fallen was no longer solid. It was soft, spongy. It felt like it was breathing. I looked down and my blood ran cold. The floor was moving. There was no time to think, no time to react. I scrambled to my feet, my mind racing for any escape, but I could feel the walls closing in around me. The house wasn't just a house anymore, it was a trap. A prison built on the souls of its past victims. And now, I was one of them. I could hear the whispers growing louder again, filling every corner of the room. But now, they weren't just whispers. They were voices, screams. "Get out. Leave before it's too late. You're next." I ran for the door, throwing my shoulder against it, but it wouldn't open. I screamed, slamming my fists into the wood, feeling the walls tremble. The whispers now roared in my ears, as if the house was reacting to my desperation, feeding off my fear. And then, the figure was in front of me. His face was inches from mine, his breath cold against my skin. "It's too late for you." His hands reached out, grabbing me with an unnatural strength. And just as I thought I was going to be pulled into the shadows, the room went still. The whispers stopped. The air grew heavy, suffocating. And for the first time since I'd entered the house, I heard a new voice. It was faint at first, but it grew louder. "Get out!" I turned, and there in the corner of the room stood a figure. It was me. I stared at my own face, twisted with fear, as the figure reached toward me. The last thing I heard before the darkness took over was my own voice, whispering, "You shouldn't have come here."